Hey everyone, it's Tom. Welcome to my third and final instalment of my 1/48 Tiger 1 early production build from USTAR. If you haven't seen the previous videos, you can check them out through the links below. But for now, sit back and enjoy as I walk you through how I created this small winter vignette. In this scene, I'll be placing the winter camouflage Tiger 1 on a muddy track beside a small stream, with a slight rise on the opposite side. The sparse vegetation and harsh winter cold will be represented by layers of snow. At least, that's the effect I'm going for. I started by cutting out a piece of foam just a bit larger than the tank itself to avoid too much empty space. The scene follows a diagonal layout which adds visual interest, and I marked this out with a Sharpie. Once I was satisfied with the basic layout, I began removing excess foam, using a metal brush from an SE80 cleaning kit to refine the shapes. For some of the foam cutting I used a hot wire. It made the process much easier. I don't have a fancy cutter, but a simple setup with two pieces of wood sandwiching the foam kept everything straight. With the basic shape complete, I turned my attention to the balsa wood skirting. I secured it in place with elastic bands, and after allowing enough time for it to dry, I moved on to layering the mud. For this I used NIG acrylic mud. The specific product isn't too important since it will all be painted over later. I chose to do the skirting first because it improves the final presentation, unlike my Censure in Normandy diorama where the exposed wood at the top wasn't as polished as I wanted. While the mud paste was still drying, I carefully placed some rounded stone that I collected from a beach. Since water naturally erodes stones, rounded ones fit perfectly for this scene. I also added a few medium-sized stones left over from the Censure diorama, along with some sharp sand to speed up the drying time and to add texture to the mud. I studied a lot of old photos from the Eastern Front, and I noticed that the mud often looked flat and packed down due to the freezing ground temperatures. To replicate this, I used a flat brush to gently flatten the areas where the tank tracks would sit. I then carefully pressed the tank into the acrylic mud before it had fully dried, ensuring the tracks made a realistic impression. To add even more texture to the mud, I chopped up some AK dried seagrass and secured it in place with watered down PVA glue. Once that was dried, I used undiluted PVA glue straight from the tub to lay the static grass. With the groundwork complete, the scene was ready for painting. I began by painting the entire vignette black, a technique popularised by Night Shift. I find it's a great way to unify the scene, enhance contrast, and create an artificial shadows, especially in any spots where the paint might miss. Since this scene is set in winter, the grass wouldn't be flourishing. To reflect this, I first sprayed a layer of XF59 Desert Yellow as the darker base colour, followed by XF60 Dark Yellow to add highlights and variation. Any overspray on the ground was cleared up by respraying the base with XF52 Flat Earth, and I used XF57 Buff to highlight the raised areas. Next I focused on the stream bed, using a mixture of ochre and brown tones as a base layer. These would be later toned down with enamel washes to reduce their intensity. I also individually painted each stone at this stage to ensure they blended naturally into the scene. Once the acrylic paint was dry, I applied some AK wet ground to further unify the scene. Since I had already used this product on the tank, it was important to tie the model and the vignette together. I added some splashes onto the side of the grass to simulate pre-snowfall weathering, another small but crucial step to enhance realism. The stream bed also received a coat of AK wet ground, along with some dark brown wash in the crevices and darker areas to add depth. While this was drying, I used the wet technique to add moss, applying a few layers of AK slimy grime dark and light. I used a lighter tone in the more open areas and the darker tone along the bank to create the depth I was aiming for. At first, I wasn't sure if applying still water was necessary, since I was following the AK FAQ Dioramas book, but Night Shift recommended it to help seal the stream bed before pouring the resin, so I didn't want to take any chances. This meant waiting an extra 24 hours for it to dry before applying the resin. Since I had some still water left over, I also added some in front of the tank to enhance the muddy wet look to the ground. As a small Easter egg for the scene, I added a spare machine gun from the model kit, painting it in various rust tones so it could rest on the stream bed. It's a simple but nice touch in my opinion. And with that done, I was ready to pour the resin. I used Tamiya tape to maintain the resin shapes, though if I were to do this again, I'd handle this step before applying the still water. I ended up with a terrible leak which could have been avoided with better timing. The resin process itself was straightforward. I mixed 1 part resin with a tiny drop, literally just a drop, of enamel paint, followed by 2 parts hardener. I mix this very carefully as air bubbles can form at any stage. If they do, you can remove them with a small lighter. I poured the resin carefully using a pipette and left it to dry for 24 hours. The next day I removed the tape, trimmed the resin that had crept up the tape and sanded down the leak area in preparation for the AK Water Gel Transparent. The gel is thick and holds its shape well, making it easy to blend. It dries fairly quickly, so you can apply multiple layers in a short time. I also experimented with creating water foam. I mixed the water gel effects and micro balloons in a 50-50 ratio and applied it with a toothpick. Up close the result wasn't as great as I hoped, but from a distance it adds visual interest. Layers are crucial for making a scene look realistic, so the next step was to create some old hard snow. I mixed snow sprinkles and micro balloons in equal parts, adding a few drops of still water. This mix was placed along the track and vegetation, blending nicely with the still water. Before moving on to the soft snow, I left the hard snow dry completely and turned my attention to the telegraph pole you may have already seen earlier. I used a razor saw to bring out the grain and texture of the post before spraying it black and highlighting it with buff. For the weathering, I applied a wash of watered down Vallejo Iraqi sand and German camouflage black brown, concentrating the black brown towards the edges. I also added a small PE piece and some details, which were given a rust effects wash. Finally, I applied some slime grime to add depth to the base. To depict the fresh foamy layer of snow that had fallen over the previous one, I used AK Terrain snow. I blended it with still water, and to achieve the final look, I added some micro balloons for extra texture. I also added this onto the Telegraph pole. In a little simple way, I like to think it represents the passage of time. To add depth to the track, I used ammo wet ground with a small drop of water. I didn't use too much still water as the product can congeal. This mix was also used for the final touch, splashing fresh mud onto the scene. Lastly, I painted the balsa wood black and carefully placed the tank on its new home. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, you can hit the like button to kick the algorithm into action, or share this clip with a friend. And if I've added value, please consider subscribing. This project has been a long time in the making, mainly because I'm a slow builder, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope you've enjoyed following along. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more images, I'm on Instagram with the link in the description below.